Okay. So yes, this is the topic that we are all gathered here for, about rousing the love for English and other languages among children. So we'll be talking a lot about how languages are introduced and why are they introduced, why are they important. So this is the general course content. So we'll begin with what language does to your brain. So as in, when you start learning a language, what actually happens? What is the learning process of a language? Then we'll move on to language learning for people who are learning it as an alternate language. So if you are from India and you're learning English, so for you English is the second language, is the alternate language. So in that case, what are the challenges and how they can be dealt with? And then after that, getting in touch with the language and really becoming interested and the tools and environments involved for the same. So you can put in your responses. This is an interactive session, so we'll be getting a lot of input from people. Excuse me. Okay. So the first thing is how did language come up and how does it affect the brain? So any of you can put in any guesses, anything that you want to say about this? How did language come up, or what do you think languages do to your brain? What all do they influence? Do they influence your actions? Do they influence your decisions? Yes. There was a need for communication that led to the discovery of language. Personal needs, social needs, yes. So yes, the basic thing is it was born out of a need for communication, and different animals, different primates through our evolutionary ladder, they had different kinds of languages. So gradually, when languages became more complicated, so the primary need for a language is being able to think in a language. Okay, when we think, our thoughts, are they ever anything other than language? Is it possible to think without a language? Can you try it for a second? Did any thoughts come in without a language? It always needs a language. So graphics are not thoughts. Graphics are visualizations. So when thoughts come in, they always have some kind of a language involved. Uh, so what languages or multiple languages, what they do is they help you think through very different perspectives, because different languages never have the same words in every language. One very typical example, when we talk about religion, yes, we need language for understanding things. So is it for just understanding things, or it is also for recording it and being able to transfer that understanding? Okay, I'm not audible. Am I audible? Okay. So, Paulmati, probably there is some issue with your earphone or maybe sound setting. Okay. So, yeah, so different languages have words which are definitely not translatable into any other language. So, a very typical example is the word dharma. Have you heard of the word dharma? We say that it is religion, but is it really religion? Can you think of different ways dharma is used in Sanskrit or Hindi and try to translate it into English? When you say dharmic, what does dharmic translate? Yes, duties. What else? Belief, yes. Spiritualism, yeah. Responsibility. Action also, yes. Dharma, adharma, we have heard of this. Code of conduct. Yeah. So, as you noticed, we have different words like this, which mean a whole lot of things that don't mean the same thing in another language. And we probably don't even have that word in that language. So, different languages makes your brain develop in so many ways, and even your viewpoint changes through so many ways. Now, okay. So even the power of grammar, like there are a few people when you say you meet with an accident, or when you say an accident happened. So in different languages, it translates differently. So some people will say, "Okay, I broke my arm." So, मतलब, if you translate that into Hindi, it will become मैंने मेरा हाथ तोड़ा. Why would someone reasonably break their arm? But then just because of a grammar situation, वहाँ पे different words, different phrases mean different things. So grammar also changes the way how you look at things. So जैसे in a lot of Western languages, uh, he met with an accident. तो मतलब वो वहां एक्सीडेंट तक पहुंचा मतलब द ओनली एक्ट द पर्सन डिड वाज बी इन्वॉल्वड इन द एक्सीडेंट सो देन देयर इज नो रिस्पांसिबिलिटी फॉर दैट एक्सीडेंट एंड इन हिंदी वे से उसका एक्सीडेंट हुआ या फिर उसने एक्सीडेंट किया तो देन दैट ट्रांसलेट्स डिफरेंटली या डायरेक्ट ट्रांसलेशन सो so these are the things that happen when you learn different languages. Now, the age when this happens, the strongest is 0 to 6 years old. So this is the age group when children start associating people with languages. So if it is said that a child has the ability to learn something like 8 languages by the age of 6 years. So if you have 8 different family members and each of those 8 family members speak one language each. So by the end of 6 years, probably the child will be able to speak in 6 different languages and understand completely and maybe even write. So this is how it happens. From 0 to 6, it is very important to keep in mind that children learn languages according to people. Now, if the same person speaks in 2 or 3 languages, then the child will get confused. Then it won't work. So you have to be loyal to one language per person in this age group. Now the acceptance part, that is when you are dealing with a second language. This is more related to a social issue, and language, as we spoke about it, is a communication thing, and communication is always social. You cannot have communication without people or without anybody else reading it, even yourself. So, what are the different things that we do in languages with languages? Suppose you know English. What do you do with English? Read, write, talk, think, communicate. Yes. Okay. Speak, write, used for e-conversation. Express your feelings. Yes. Expressions. Correct. So these are all outward things, except for maybe writing or things like that, which are inward. So this is a very major difference. So you have listening and writing, which are inwards, and you have speaking and yeah, speaking and expressing, which are outwards. So interactions, you develop language through, yes, LSRW skills. But a little bit of modification in that, because listening and reading, we'll take it as learning because they are kinds of learning. And speaking, yes, it is outward. Writing is kind of neutral. You can write for yourself or you can write for somebody else. And along with that, we can add expressing. So we'll come to expressing in some time. So interactions. Uh, Okay, so you interact with different people, and depending on the kind of interactions, you understand the importance for that language. So, for example, if you are in a society where English is looked down upon by society, by schools, it is considered important, and people feel, okay, yes, you have to know English to get a job and stuff like that. But as far as social interactions are concerned, if you start speaking English, then people will try to put you down. This happens a lot of times. If you are speaking in English, then people don't find you very open. They'll find you a bit stuck up and things like that. And even in Hindi, so if you are speaking in Hindi, but you are using only pure words of Hindi, not the local lingo or the local language, then people look at you differently. So these kind of interactions give that subconscious message on how language is important or whether it is looked down upon. So if your child is in that kind of an environment where English is looked down upon, then obviously that importance is lost. Secondly, thoughts. So the first thing to develop around language is the food for thought, or the environment, or the uh, stimulus for it, so that the child is forced to, yes, they make fun of it. So it is, the child is forced or compelled to start thinking. Now, when I say bring out an environment, that doesn't mean that you put too many things around the child, because the child interacts and responds very strongly even to very minimalistic and simple things. So put things around that are meaningful, simple and meaningful. So, for example, if you have you heard of the nail toys or nail puzzles, where you have these two nails and they are interlocked, and then you can remove it. Yeah. So it's a very simple thing. It's just two nails and it's a puzzle. So you don't need very colorful and very fancy things, which stimulate the visual, like the eyes of the child, but don't develop the brain that way. So the next is expression. uh, Amongst ourselves within the family at home or within the school, if we make sure that we use the correct forms of words, we should always have the right words, and we should not tone it down just to make it simple for the children. Yes, if the children ask, you can explain it in 3 to 5 different ways, but then till the child doesn't ask, the words should never dip down in quality. Your language should always be good and fluent. So that is what the child picks up. Uh, and when you correct the child, you have to ensure that you correct a part of it in levels. You don't correct the entire statement, and the child has to repeat the statement. You give time for the child to repeat the statement. So the order of development, natural order of development is learning to listen first, then speak, then read, and then write. So the child is always in the listening mode first, and then the child tries to speak out because the child wants to interact and learn more. And then the child will start reading because this is also another form of learning. So remember the 0 to 6 period and the few years after that, that is a high requirement of learning. So this is the time when listening and reading develop very well. And writing comes from expression. So when you have different kinds of so when you have that kind of self consciousness, yes, you can put together a few thoughts, and then you can construct it, and then maybe share it with people. So it requires a lot of introspection. So writing can happen only after you have that kind of philosophical and social and maybe even spiritual development ready with the child. So that is the natural form, natural order of language development. Then the next is so once you focus on that order, a child is able to come to terms with language. So that language is not that daunting or not that intimidating for the child, and the child learns it happily, and learns to use it well. Now the next one. So when you say falling in love with a language, it doesn't mean that you are able to do your work correctly, you are able to write your answers correctly and stuff like that. When you say when a child falls in love with the language, it means the child picks it out from different places and different corners. Yes, appreciation is also an important factor. So here you have a lot of scope for all these things: learning, appreciation, and development, and also engaging the child in different fields which you probably never even thought possible, that it could be the child could be engaged in this way. So through books, obviously. What other ways can you use to expose the child to language? Any examples? Language games, yes. Interaction, gestures. Okay. So you can keep putting these things in the chat window. Uh, yeah, reading the newspaper. So always remember, the child will respond more strongly to things that are there in a natural life or in a normal life. So reading a newspaper, yes. Gestures also, yes. Storytelling, yes. But these things will start getting out of focus for a child if it is done as an activity for the development of language. the activities or anything, movies, cartoons, everything that is being done has to have context for the child. For example, if you listen to music, so music is something that you listen to normally also. And you just happen to ask the child, okay, do you know what these words mean? If the child is also singing the song, that is a very good thing because now the child is listening very well. So then you can have a discussion about the lyrics of a song. Then about habits, like instead of getting the children to write question answers, if you get them to write journals and make scrapbooks and get them to do creative writing, so a lot of importance is given on developing the individuality of the child. And language and individuality go hand in hand. If you don't have individuality, you cannot develop language very strongly. Okay, so this is the environment or this is the physical changes that can be done. I have just put in a few examples, but this is limitless. Uh, so one thing the child um experiences when you put out an intention, like if your intention is to have a space where you learn. So while thinking, if you do this activity, it's like okay. So have you heard of this? If you are suppose cooking or if you are making something, building something, an art piece maybe, and if you have very false, superficial or ill thoughts towards the person who you are making it for, then there is a high chance that the person will fall ill. Have you heard of this? So this is where it comes in. So basically, yeah. So the same thing goes here when you are setting up a space. It shouldn't be in your mind. I'm setting up this space so that the child starts reading. No, that is not your intention. Your intention is again, if you keep this in your mind, the child should fall in love with the language, and then if you are setting up this space, so then it helps a lot. So now within reach means at home. So if you want to develop a space like this at home, uh, you have to make sure that this activity is done with them. Because let us face it and let us be very rational here. You are not supposed to be doing the child any favors. The more favors you do for a child, the weaker the child will be. There will be no sense of freedom. There will be no sense of responsibility. The child will throw tantrums. The child will throw all kinds of acts. So here, if the child learns how difficult it is to do something like this, then the child will have a value for it. So it's not necessary. If you notice in both the pictures, on the right side, I have put four pictures of school libraries or city libraries. And on the left side, these are book corners. In both the pictures, if you notice, it's not just books. You have different things here. So I'll just zoom in here so that it's easier to view. Okay. So here you can see a few animals, you can see a few foam mats and even a pipe that is going from behind. So even that is used. The window also has a few things here. Now in the second one, a full forest kind of a scene has been developed with stars and everything and cushions. You see, it's not at all complicated. It's just a sheet on a chair and a pillow, even probably even without a cover, and a lampshade and things like that. So it's very easy to develop these kind of corners, and it will have a long-term impact only if it is done with the child. Yeah. So very important point that Shreya has pointed out. The child observes the parents' love for books and reading and then ends up liking them too. So this is what happens when you set up an environment at home. This is the physical environment that we are seeing, and the other social environment you can think about is the way people interact, the way people spend their time. So if you have grandparents or parents who read maybe at least 1 hour a day, and if the child sees that, the child is bound to pick up a book. Whether the child understands or doesn't understand, that is not our concern right now. The first concern is the child should get interested in at least exploring. Even if I don't understand, let's find out what is there in this. Then the second one is school libraries, the pictures that you see here, except for the first one. This is a public library in China. If you can notice the curves and the tiny patches in the background, I'll just try to mark it. Yeah. Can you see this part or this? All these are books. So this entire thing is a city library. Okay. So now the other one here, that is the long picture with the hexagons at the center. So there's a lot of geometrical and synthetic feel to it, which is also useful. And if you notice, the children are making the best out of it. There are pits in the center where children can sit, there are cushions and stuff like that. But it is not necessary to have such a fancy scenario. If you notice the mud brick structure on the lower left corner, you have a lot of books and you have a wide opening, and you just have normal seats. This is very uncomplicated. You don't have too many decorative cartoons or things like that. It's very simple. So simplicity also can be incorporated very well in reading spaces. And the last one on the right, you can see it has a giraffe, it has a zebra, it has different things here. It has a plant in the middle. It has a few things painted on the ceiling. So even this works. So if you treat a library as a center for knowledge instead of just as a center for books, so that draws a different kind of impact. If you treat it as just a place for books, so that has a different impact. But as long as you very consciously set up reading spaces, it is going to work out. Okay. Uh, just give me a second. Okay. Yeah. Some bookshops in India are creating interesting and cozy areas to sit and read for browsing through books. Yes, this system was started, I don't know when, but even when crosswords was all the rage, they had small corners here and there which could be used for these kind of purposes, and it was very beneficial. They actually started a reading culture because of uh, this kind of a system. Crosswords. You are giving it as an example or you're asking it as a question? Yeah, okay, example. Yeah. So crosswords was one. You have a few libraries and you have a few bookshops in Bangalore. If you check out the one on MG Road. So places like that, they have this kind of a situation. Now in schools, what can you do for promoting language in schools? So notice boards are compulsory. You have to have notice boards everywhere. And this is not just in school. You can take note of it even at home for things to do at home. You can add notice boards here and there. where children can put up anything. So that is very necessary. Next is creativity trees. So if you make a creativity tree where children can post their poems that they have written, stories that they have written, or descriptions that they have written. So that is one way to go about it. Then the pen pal system, writing letters. So writing letters is a very strong way to develop language because you a lot of thought is put into writing a letter. So if this can be revived, that would be a very good thing. We are all from different schools here, so if this can act like a community and you maybe collaborate with other schools in this forum, so uh, you can develop this pen pal system between schools, inter school. Then you can have reading events. So the libraries can also host reading events where new books can be read out. So this is one very interesting thing that we did in our school when we brought out a big package of books. Like we ordered, I think, some 30 books or something like that. It was a big packet. So yeah, literary weeks. So I felt that if we are supposed to introduce it in the school and if it is supposed to be for the children, then why not open the package with the children? A lot of times what happens is they just come to the library and they know that okay, these few books are new, and sometimes they accidentally stumble upon it or sometimes it is just kept in the front. But it makes a very different experience for them if they open the packaging, they do the listing, they do the entry in the library, and then they get a little bit of time to have the first read. So that is one. So one kind of reading event. Another kind of reading event is if you can have uh, interest interesting things. Like suppose you have an anti-war week or something like that, and if somebody picks up an anti-war book and reads a passage from the book. If you have a film week, so you read different film works or documentary works and then read a couple of passages from it, or maybe poems or things like that. So these are reading events. Then speeches, debates, discussions. This I think most of the people are doing anyways. One thing in debates, try to expand on your topics. One of the topics that one of our teachers had taken a very interesting topic. She created a debate on whether you would like to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond, and this was for children from 4th to 7th standard. So this is actually a very deep topic and people usually think about it even in business, like once they grow up and once they become professionals. But then it's also something that the children have a capability to think about. So don't limit your topics for debates, discussions, and speeches. Then theater, film, music, everything as language and everything can be developed as language if you don't assign them boring tasks after that. So if you puppet corner setup, yes. So you can extend the theater part into puppet corners also. Uh, so if all these things, sometimes do it as an assignment, but doesn't necessarily mean that you do it all the time as assignments. So have a lot of freedom also in this. Then you can have themes for songs and movies and everything. So now they are exposed. If you take the anti-war theme, so then they are being exposed to songs as well as movies, as well as newspaper articles, books, everything. But then there is an intention, a strong intention behind it, which makes a bigger impact in their minds. Then have magazines, a lot of magazines and journals and circulars. Please suggest something to enhance reading skills for preschoolers. For preschoolers, I would suggest you just keep books around. And what we have done is, academically speaking, we introduced phonics. Uh, and Okay. So now academically, even though we introduce phonics, again, the strength comes from, or the impact comes from the reading environment that you build. Since the children have libraries within the class, book corners within the class, they developed an importance for reading. Yeah, show movies related to books they have read. So we like a few examples. We did a huge drama, like our annual days are 1.5 hour dramas, and the first one we did was on Jungle Book. The next one we did was on Mary Poppins. Then after that we drifted on to Chanakya. So in Chanakya they read the whole Chanakya Niti in Sanskrit. So if you have this kind of a context, and with that context you create the culture. So if you have to do a Mary Poppins drama, you have to ensure that you study what um, 19th century, 18th century English culture looked like, what were the movements and things like that. Now for home also, you can see these book corners. Okay, so when you have timeouts, instead of saying, okay, move out of here or something like that, you let them have these cool down zones. Then you can also, since we are running out of time, I'm just jumping through. You can have journal sessions, creativity sessions, empathy maps. I'll just share with you. So, empathy maps are very powerful tools where instead of asking them to make book reviews or asking them to just write about what you learned or things like that, which is very uninteresting and uninspiring for the child, you can focus more on things like this, where the children have to actually take a step forward and put themselves in the shoes of different characters. So this is a format that is very easily available online. So you don't have to necessarily take pictures or anything here. Uh, yeah. So you have different questions about the different senses or the different actions or the different perspectives of a person. So if you take the mind, so uh, we have to think about who we are empathizing with, or who we are doing this for, the empathy map. Then you have another point where you see it from that person's point of view. Okay, considering the problem that the person is faced with, what do you think they need to do about it? Then you have the eyes. So what does the character see? Then what does the character say? And what do they do? And what do they hear? So you have different sub questions. What are they hearing others say? What are they hearing from friends, from colleagues, second hand? So this is a slightly more sophisticated empathy map that interestingly, this is actually a corporate exercise also. Uh, but you don't have to make it this complicated for them. You can use something like this. And the empathy maps are also very powerful tools in resolving conflict. So if you have a fight that has broken up, so you can use an empathy map to understand what happened. Why has this fighting started? Okay. Now this is just something that I noticed in one of the schools that I was visiting. So they had put this up near the library, and I'm sure you can pick these kind of notices up or charts up anywhere you go. So you have the rights of the reader. So, for example, the right not to read, the right to skip, the right not to finish a book, the right to read it again, the right to read anything, the right to mistake a book for real life, the right to read anywhere. So these are the different, like very interesting points that the children can connect with, and with very interesting illustrations also. For those of you who read Roald Dahl, you'll recognize these sketches. Quentin Blake is the person who does the illustrations for Roald Dahl. So it is. So the question about preschoolers, how do you introduce reading to preschoolers? Yeah. Introducing reading to preschoolers, you have to keep it in mind that this is the first attempt. If you notice a child is probably, just keeping the book aside and getting up and going, least bothered, least interested in continuing. If you catch hold of the child and make the child sit there again, the child is not going to pick up the book or touch a book again for the rest of his or her life, at least willingly. So if you try to force them to read something, this is what is going to happen. And if the child asks for help in understanding, so yes, you should help them out, and preferably help them out without translating. Try to use simpler language, and instead of translating, you just try to help the child understand the sense of it. The child has that capacity that after growing up, they'll figure out the meaning, they'll figure out the context, everything. But right now, try to keep yourself away from translations. So yeah, we finished two forms of empathy map, a complicated one which can be done with elder children, a simpler one which can be done at any time with anyone, and a list of library quotes. There's also another thing that I wanted to share. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so if you do want to have some kind of a worksheet or some kind of a thinking going on with music, with movies, so this is like an empathy map, but this is more about you. This is more about yourself. So this will be very helpful in self-expression. This will be very helpful in introspection. So when you hear a piece of music, what mood is it bringing to you? Uh, then what characters do you think are involved in this? Or with a few more complicated songs and children of slightly older level, you can maybe ask them things like, what characters do you think are being affected by this or are described in this? Things like that. So this is just an example. It's from a site called wqxr.org. So this is what a filled one looks like for younger children, and this is what an empty one looks like. So yeah, coming down to the presentation again. So you should have a lot of notice boards. Try to engage them in things where it's more of them. It is less of things that you're filling in the child and more of things that the child comes up with. So wherever that happens, the child will develop an importance and a love for the language. So opinion pieces are, if you read a newspaper article and if you want to express your views on it, that is an opinion piece. Or if some event or incident has happened and you want to express your point of view on it, that is an opinion piece. Corrections, as mentioned by someone before, have to be done very carefully. You cannot just do corrections for the sake of correcting the language. Uh, it has to be done from the point of view that you are trying to tweak or trying to play with the thoughts of a child. So if you do a correction, the whole structure in the mind of the child changes. So the correction has to be done very gently, and once the correction has been done, the child has to repeat the corrections. And do it in layers, do it one at a time. So if a sentence has been spoken and all of it is wrong, that doesn't mean you change the entire sentence. Today maybe start with spelling mistakes. Tomorrow maybe start with a bit of grammar. You check with subject verb agreement, and then you move on to something more complicated, things like that. So always do it in layers. Okay, so once all this is done, the core of all this, the core of all this is when language is inculcated or exposed to a child from a higher perspective. A higher perspective means when language is not just a tool, but language is a way of expression that works around the world and that can actually turn the world around. When you do it with that kind of an intention, it creates a very different effect, and then the child wants to learn. So uh, you can see this example here. If you can see this tiny thing, can anyone read what is written on this small board? This tiny board here. Can someone read this? Should I zoom in? Yeah. Is it clearer now?
I am getting bored.
Yes.
Can I read a
Yes.
book?
Yes. So this is something that was seen on one of the boards in our class, just randomly out of nowhere. I don't know why. And this was after, I think, 2 years of working on a system where people start falling in love with a language. And before that, before these 2 years, the situation was such, what we discussed some time back. Okay, if you try to speak in English, then people will try to put you down, things like that. So that was the general scenario, and because of these kind of activities, because of these kind of things, today this is a situation where people would rather read than break stuff or dirty the walls or things like that. So the ultimate effect of this is this. So if this is the intention that you keep in mind while doing these things, then it is bound to create a difference. And language will be looked at very differently by the children. So language creates content. Content builds character, and character makes country. So how you think, how you read, what you learn, everything turns into content, and this content ultimately builds the character of that person, and several characters make a country. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I have already shared. I shared the email ID or the ID and password through my own email ID. So please feel free to ask there. Thank you very much.